Hello and welcome to the week ahead from the Financial Times in London. Here are some of the big stories we're looking at in the coming days. Donald Trump makes what will be his first address as US President to a joint session of the US Congress. EU ministers meet to discuss concerns over world trade. And the world's biggest advertising group, WPP, reports its full year results. First, Donald Trump will address a joint session of the US Congress on Tuesday. It will be the first such speech of his presidency, and he's expected to defend the flurry of sometimes controversial executive orders that he's issued since taking office, as well as rebutting reports that have portrayed his White House as one in a perpetual state of disarray. Our Washington bureau chief, Dimitri Sevastopoulou, has more on what Mr. Trump needs to address in his speech.
Trump has had a difficult first month. He's got a lot of chaos and infighting in the White House. He came in saying he was going to do big things on infrastructure, on tax reform, and on immigration. His immigration plan has been knocked back by the courts. It looks like he's going to take longer on infrastructure than he had intended himself, and it's not clear whether the Republicans on Capitol Hill have even come to agreement on what tax reform will look like. So I think Trump is going to try and explain to the American people, here's what I said I was going to do, and here's what I've done and why it's been great. But the question will be whether people will believe that and whether the markets will start to think that maybe they priced in a little bit too much optimism.
Mr. Trump's most high-profile and contentious orders have been in relation to immigration, including a ban on travellers from 7 majority Muslim countries. That order led to nationwide protests and a judicial defeat. The address to Congress will come as the Trump administration rolls out a new executive order that it says will stand up to judicial scrutiny. Mr. Trump's speech will be watched closely, and of particular interest will be whether he chooses to strike a unifying tone. Millions of people have taken to the streets to protest his administration. He remains unpopular with historically low approval ratings for a new president. Now to Europe, where trade ministers, rattled by Mr. Trump's protectionist overtones, will be meeting this week for informal talks. The US president's rejection of a trade deal with 12 Asia-Pacific countries and his threat to punish American companies that move production overseas has prompted questions as to what steps Europe should take to bolster world commerce. As Mr. Trump moves Washington away from multilateral trade agreements, EU officials are discussing whether they should strengthen links with Asia and other emerging markets to protect the globalised trading system. Speaking earlier this month, this is what German Chancellor Angela Merkel had to say about Europe's trading relations.
Natürlich werden wir als Europäische Union, wenn wir jetzt im Blick auf die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika vielleicht nicht oder langsamer, das müssen wir jetzt ja erstmal sehen, vorankommen, dann auch andere Handelsabkommen natürlich weiter schnell verhandeln. Wir verhandeln mit Japan, wir verhandeln mit Indien, wir verhandeln mit Australien und wir verhandeln mit Mercosur. Und das sind alles Bereiche, in denen wir uns jetzt konzentrieren können. Und ansonsten müssen wir erst einmal wissen, wie wir mit der neuen amerikanischen Administration auch.
Brussels could consider pursuing deeper ties with China too, although it's already grappling with contentious plans to impose higher US-style duties on steel allegedly dumped by China in European markets. The ministers will take stock of talks on a free trade pact with Japan, which are well advanced but have yet to result in a deal. And finally, WPP, the world's biggest advertising group, will publish its full year results this week. While it beat analysts' expectations in the 3 months to the end of September with a 23% rise in revenues, a performance which drove shares in the FTSE 100 company 4% higher, WPP is nevertheless likely to signal that trading conditions are tough as marketers remain cautious in an uncertain geopolitical and economic climate. Analysts will be looking closely to see if WPP manages to avoid the problems that its peer Publicis suffered in the US last year, which contributed to a net loss of €527 million in 2016. As our European media correspondent David Bond explains, competition is a big concern for the sector.
Well, the two things which are really worrying the big advertising agencies like WPP, like Publicis, is the increased threat from the management consultancy companies like Accenture, who have really been targeting the advertising business of late. And the other thing, of course, which Sir Martin Sorrell, the chief executive of WPP, always talks about, is this growing dominance of Facebook and Google, where probably now Facebook will become the second biggest platform where WPP spends its money, probably will overtake Rupert Murdoch's News Corp at some point this year. And they're really worried about that dominance because it means that there's not enough competition at that top level, and they'd like to see other media players coming up where they can spend their money.
And that's what the week ahead looks like from the Financial Times in London. See you again next time.